Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. Before we start our lecture, it's a request, please subscribe the channel. If you find this video valuable, please like it and share it. Let's start. Of critical discourse analysis. In the previous videos, we have seen or learned that critical discourse analysis is one of the widely used method of analyzing discourse. It doesn't mean that it's free from criticism. There are a lot of criticism on critical discourse analysis. So let's see or talk what kind of critique it has earned. Subjectivity and research bias. Critical discourse analysis relies on researchers' interpretation, which can be influenced by their own political and ideological stance. One of the objections on critical discourse analysis is that it is a bias, because the analyst analyzes the data based on his or her own ideological or political stance. So there are chances that analysis would be biased. For example, two analysts may interpret the same political speech differently depending on their own worldview. Response to this critique is, critical scholars argue that all research is value-laden. The key is to be transparent about one's position. So what is the answer? No doubt, it is based on the ideological stance of the researcher or analyst, but this analysis is based on data, or it should be transparent. The next one is selective data sampling. It is also criticized for having a selective sampling data. Critical discourse analysis studies cherry-picking data that supports their arguments while ignoring contradictory evidence. This objection is this, that the researchers or analysts select the data that support their own point of view. They select the data based on their own choices. The data is not given a free choice, or it is not independently. For example, only choosing headlines that portray immigrants negatively while ignoring neutral or positive ones, because there is possibility in the newspaper that have presented immigrants differently, but the researcher would select the immigrants who have been presented negatively. So the response to this critique is that broader, more and representative databases or data sets and corpus-assisted CDA can reduce this risk. If the data is more or wide data has been used, so this risk can be reduced. This biasness can be overcome. Another criticism on critical discourse analysis is that it lacks a clear methodology. CDA is often seen as a broad approach rather than a strict method, making replication results. So one data may have different results by applying different. One data may have a different result based on the methods or approaches applied on that data. For example, different CDA practitioners use different steps and tools without standardized procedure. So there is no standardized procedure that you can follow. Analysts can use any approach based on his or her objectives. Response to this criticism is that scholars like Fairclough, Van Dyke, and Wodak have proposed more structured frameworks to guide analysis. Their approaches can minimize this risk. Next objection on critical discourse analysis is that it overemphasizes on power and ideology. CDA tends to focus heavily on uncovering dominance, inequality, and ideology, sometimes at the expense of other functions of language, humor, creativity, and aesthetics. So the critical discourse analysis only focus on these things. It ignores humor, creativity, and aesthetics. A political speech may be analyzed only for manipulation, overlooking elements like storytelling or audience engagement. Response to this objection is that balanced CDA can incorporate multiple dimensions of discourse. Our discourse analysis may use multiple aspects to minimize this biasness. Another objection on critical discourse analysis is that confirmation bias and advocacy. Since CDA is often linked to social justice, critics claim it can slip into activism, prioritizing advocacy over balance analysis. For example, analysts start with the assumption that media is biased and then only finding evidence that confirm it. So it claims that media is biased, and the analyst would only find examples that support his or her assumption that media is biased. So answer to this critique is that CDA scholars argue that taking a moral stance against inequality is part of its mission. The mission of critical discourse analysis is finding inequality or challenging inequality, but still requires rigorous evidence. It cannot be based on whims or emotions. Strong evidence are required to support evidence, to support the assumption. Another objection on critical discourse analysis is limited generalizability. Many critical discourse studies focus on specific cases, making it hard to generalize findings to other contexts. So it focuses on specific contexts, and that cannot be applied to another context. For example, CDA of UK immigration discourse may not apply directly to the Australian or Canadian context. So all contexts might have different findings. Response to this answer is, this question is, that comparative and cross-cultural critical discourse analysis can broaden application. You may analyze the presentation of immigration in UK, Australia, or Canada and compare how the immigrants have been presented or framed. The next objection on critical discourse analysis is that it neglects audience interpretation. CDA often analyzes texts without studying how actual audience interpret them, because it is interpretation based on the analysis of the researcher or analysts. Example, news headlines may seem biased to analysts but be read differently by diverse audience. So different people may perceive or understand that heading differently, but the analyst would analyze or evaluate that particular headings according to his or her own point of view. Response to or answer to this critique is that combining CDA with audience studies can address this gap. So if I could sum up the different critiques we have discussed or analyzed, or what kind of objections have been raised against critical discourse analysis, we can say that CDA is powerful for uncovering hidden ideologies, but it should guard against subjectivity, selective samplings, and methodological weakness. So it should not be, the researcher or analyst should avoid subjectivity. It should be as neutral as possible. And the analyst should use large sampling that would minimize this biasness. Transparency, large data sets, and multi-method approaches can make CDA more robust and credible. Thank you for watching all these series of critical discourse studies. We have discussed almost all the major topics, so you can watch all these videos. If you have any questions, please write in the comment box. Thank you. Take care.